Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is R.S. Raghu and with me is Renu Kataria, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. India set to reach $400 billion in exports this financial year, asserts Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal. Russian President Vladimir Putin says US and its allies have ignored Russia's top security demands over tensions on Ukraine. Prime Minister Modi discusses bilateral relations with Prime Minister of Bahrain Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa over telephone. Special and privileged strategic partnership between Russia and India, a significant contribution to strengthening international stability, says outgoing Russian ambassador to India. US requests an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council over North Korea's missile test. India and the European Union hold second maritime security dialogue in a virtual format. And in cricket, India set a target of 291 runs for Australia in the semi-final of the ICC Under-19 World Cup 2022 in Antigua. As the number of COVID-19 cases are rising fast in several parts of the country, we appeal to our listeners to be vigilant and get fully vaccinated and help others, including children between 15 and 18 years, to get vaccinated. As the new Omicron variant of coronavirus is causing concern, please continue to follow the 3 simple steps to stay safe. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing and focus on hand and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact the national helpline numbers 011-2397-8046 and 1075. And now the news in detail. India's Minister of Commerce and Industry Piyush Goyal told the lower house Lok Sabha on Wednesday that India is well on its way to reach exports worth $400 billion by this financial year. Replying during the question hour, he said there is consistency in export values from last April at the rate of $30 billion a month, and the total value has reached the figure of $334 billion so far. Mr. Goyal said the government is in talks with countries like the UAE, Australia, the UK, the EU, Canada and many others to enter into free trade agreements or comprehensive economic partnership agreements. He said the move is to garner new markets for Indian exports and to the shift in the global geopolitical situation post-COVID-19 pandemic in aspects like supply chains. He termed the productivity-linked incentive scheme as a move that has come in at the right time to give impetus to the industry to take advantage of the changing market conditions. On India's walkout from the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement RCEP, the minister said it was welcomed by the industry, trade, farming communities and political parties in view of lack of transparency in it. However, he said India has entered into bilateral agreements with some of the member states of the grouping and is working on it with some other nations. Mr. Goyal said the talks with the European Union on the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement CEPA has remained stalled for long. And he added, due to the concerted diplomatic efforts by India, the negotiations resumed in July 2021.
Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday said that the US and its allies have ignored Russia's top security demands, but added that Moscow is still open for more talks with the West on easing soaring tensions over Ukraine. The Kremlin's demands include guarantees that NATO won't expand to Ukraine and will roll back its forces from Eastern Europe. These demands rejected by NATO and the US as non-starters. Meanwhile, the White House said that Secretary of State Antony Blinken has reiterated the United States' commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Briefing the media, White House Press Secretary Jan Psaki said that the U.S. is also committed to upholding the right of all countries to determine their own foreign policy and alliances. The developments come amid fears that Russia might invade Ukraine, fueled by the build-up of an estimated 100,000 Russian troops near Ukraine's borders. Meanwhile, in a statement at the United Nations Security Council, India's ambassador to UN, T.S. Tirumurti, on Monday said, New Delhi's interest is in finding a solution that can provide for immediate de-escalation of tensions, taking into account the legitimate security interests of all countries and aimed towards securing long-term peace and stability in the region and beyond. He said they have also been in touch with all concerned parties. It is their considered view that the issue can also be resolved through diplomatic dialogue. Earlier, India abstained from a procedural vote in the United Nations Security Council on whether or not discussions were required on the threat of a Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Outgoing ambassador of Russia to India, Nikolai Kudashev, said that India and Russia managed to adapt to all difficulties and create a true spirit of mutual assistance without any artificial barriers. In his farewell address, Ambassador Kudashev hailed the special and privileged strategic partnership between Russia and India. Mr. Kudashev, upon the completion of his tenure, announced that the next Russian ambassador to India will be Mr. Denis Alipov.
The special and privileged strategic partnership between Russia and India, which is based on a positive, unified agenda, makes a significant contribution to strengthening international stability. Together with like-minded countries, we stand firmly on the path of the establishment of fair and equal polycentric world based on the principles of the United Nations Charter. We are enhancing coordination within the United Nations, G20, BRICS, SCO, RIC, and other important platforms.
The United States has requested an emergency meeting on Thursday of the UN Security Council on North Korea in the wake of Pyongyang launching its most powerful missile since 2017 last weekend. The meeting is expected to be held in camera. North Korea confirmed on Monday it had fired a Hwasong 12 ground-to-ground intermediate and long-range ballistic missile. This is its first test since 2017 of such a powerful weapon. Earlier, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres denounced the launch as a clear violation of Security Council resolutions. The test on Sunday was North Korea's 7th in January, the most ever carried out by the country in a calendar month, raising fears Pyongyang could renew nuclear and intercontinental missile tests.
India and the European Union held their second maritime security dialogue in a virtual format on Tuesday. India and the EU discussed cooperation, including in the field of maritime domain awareness, capacity building and joint naval activities, following their successful joint naval exercise in the Gulf of Aden in June 2021. India and the EU are committed to a free, open, inclusive and rules-based maritime order in the Indo-Pacific region. Their shared vision is underpinned by a respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty, democracy, rule of law, freedom of navigation and overflight, unimpeded lawful commerce, and peaceful resolution of disputes in accordance with international law, notably the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea. India's Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, India-EU Maritime Cooperation and regional initiatives to address international maritime security issues were also discussed at the meeting. Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke on telephone on Wednesday with the Crown Prince and Prime Minister, Kingdom of Bahrain, Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa. In a statement, the External Affairs Ministry of India said that Prince Salman conveyed greetings on the occasion of Republic Day of India. India celebrated its 73rd Republic Day on the 26th of January. Both leaders reviewed the bilateral relations between India and Bahrain and expressed satisfaction that the relationship has seen continued progress in diverse sectors, including political, trade and investment, energy, health security and people-to-people contacts. India and Bahrain are celebrating the Golden Jubilee of establishment of diplomatic relations between the two countries in 2021-22. Prime Minister Modi thanked the Bahraini leadership for taking excellent care of the Indian community in Bahrain during the COVID pandemic and also for looking after their social and cultural needs.
Meanwhile, India's Chief of Army Staff General M.M. Naravane had a telephonic interaction with Australia's Army Chief Lieutenant General Rick Burr. They discussed issues of bilateral defence cooperation. The Beijing Winter Olympics torch relay began on Wednesday, just a few days ahead of the opening of the international sporting event in the Chinese capital against a backdrop of diplomatic boycotts and ongoing COVID-19 outbreaks, including in the host city. The Beijing Organizing Committee had shortened the relay route because of the coronavirus pandemic, and the number of torch bearers were also reduced to 1,200. China is facing a diplomatic boycott of the 2022 Winter Olympics over its human rights record, which it had condemned. Despite the Western boycott, a few world leaders, including Russian President Vladimir Putin and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, are expected to attend the Games.
The Bangladesh government has decided to extend the closure of schools and colleges for 2 more weeks till February 20th in light of the continuing surge in COVID-19. Earlier, the government had announced the closure of educational institutions for 2 weeks from January 21st till the 6th of February. Our Dhaka correspondent reports that the government had announced a special vaccination program for school students above the age of 12 to allow face-to-face teaching in the school. However, the new wave of COVID-19 pandemic forced the government to close down school and colleges again from the 21st of January.
In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on the Union Budget 2022-23.
The one thing that you've been talking about before the budget also, that the budget needs to spend big on infrastructure and do more to boost consumption. Are you happy with what has happened in this budget?
Definitely. I think on infrastructure, the government has reiterated its focus, has increased the allocation, and that's, I think, a great force multiplier to get the economy back on track. I think the economy is already heading back on track, but we need to sustain this growth for the next few years at least. And I think the focus on infrastructure builds that situation for us. It creates long-term demand and helps the cost competitiveness of the industry. On the consumption side, the government's support to the MSME sector, to the high-contact sectors which have suffered by extending the credit guarantee scheme, I think these are initiatives which helps. But fundamentally, more spend on infrastructure by the government, hopefully followed by more spend on investment by the private sector, will help create more jobs and bring consumption back to the economy.
Mr. Narendran, you're hopeful for the private sector investment to come in. Private sector investment is generally predicated on consumer demand that seems to be there. And do you see that consumer demand also picking up? And there's another thing that you had been mentioning in your pre-budget interactions was about the expenditure on MG Narega. I don't see MG Narega mentioned in this budget. Is that some expectation that you had?
So what we had asked for is, while the focus on investment is there, we should also focus on consumption so that the fragility which we saw in consumption should be addressed. And Manrega schemes, etc., address incomes at the lowest levels of society and helps build the sentiment on consumption. Because the job situation has not been so great for the last couple of years thanks to the pandemic for many sectors. Many people's incomes have shrunk, and on top of that, the health expenditure has gone up. So that's why we felt that there has to be support in consumption. We are seeing some support. Of course, this has to be further supported by more job creation by both private sector and government. So I think actions are in the right direction. We have to see that the expenditure that is planned is executed on the ground and translates to money flowing into households. And I think that is what will trigger the consumption. In terms of investment, see, there are two types of demand. One is the B2B demand and one is the B2C demand. So if you look at the sectors, private sector mein jahan investment zyada hota hai, if you see even 10 years back data, 70-80% of the investment came from three sectors. One is power, two is metals, and three is chemicals. So isme ab dekhiye to power has changed totally in the last 10 years. Those days it was more thermal power plants. Now it's more on green energy. But metals and chemicals have already come back to the investment cycle. So that's why we are confident that the investments will follow. The only sector where investments is yet to pick up, will take maybe another year, is automobile, because udhar consumer demand has struggled in some areas, but in some areas it's because of the semiconductor issues. But we are hoping that during this year auto demand will also come back, semiconductor issues will ease out, and the auto value chain is long, so a lot of MSMEs will benefit from that. So we are hoping to see that happen during this year.
Mr. Narendran, if you look at deficit numbers, 6.9% this year, 6.4% next year, there's one thing that industry does worry about, although the last few years have been benign as far as interest rates have been concerned. Are you worried about increase in the interest rates?
Well, that is inevitable because I think the low interest rates were there to help the world economy recover. And in India also, we had the benefit of global low interest rates. But as inflation picks up, interest rates will go up. The Fed has announced that in the US. I think corporates have been planning for that. If you look at many capital-intensive sectors, the corporates have been deleveraging so that if there is a sudden rise in interest rates, they are less impacted. I think impact which we need to look out for is how much of money flows, particularly for the startup ecosystem and other entrepreneurial initiatives in India, are affected by money going back to the US from emerging markets as interest rates in US goes up. But we are also seeing many companies who are very cash rich. If you look at Google or a Facebook or Microsoft and Amazon and all of them, they're all looking at investing in India because of the opportunities in India. They are portfolio investors. They are looking at the long-term demand in India. So we are positive that that kind of investment will continue to flow into India.
Dr. Sharma, welcome to All India Radio. This is Ravi here. I just wanted to draw your attention to one thing, which is the upcoming Mpc of Rbi in February. I think between 7th to 9th, this Mpc will be there. Hitherto, for a good period now, the RBI has been pretty growth-oriented. It has not focused on inflation so much, but now we are looking at, in November, we saw WPI of 14.23%, and the revised fiscal deficit for this year will be 6.9 instead of 6.8, and the next year also will be 6.4, although the finance minister has mentioned that she is looking at below 4.5 fiscal deficit by 25-26 FY. What are your inflationary concerns regarding this budget?
Yes, I totally agree on your connotation that inflation is a major challenge at this juncture. We have to address the inflation because particularly if WPI inflation is in a very high trajectory. So we have to address the WPI inflation because high WPI inflation will not support the manufacturing competitiveness, which is our mission to become competitive and to become manufacturing hub and to become more and more competitive in the international market. So now I believe the government is doing a lot to control the inflation, and government has announced so many reforms actually for the transportation and logistics sector so that all these costs are not impacting the manufacturing sector, because these costs are major ingredient of the manufacturers which escalate the prices and the cost of doing business. So government is undertaking the steps, but I believe with the next 2-3 months with the Rabi crops hitting the market and more improvement in the supply chain will be beneficial for the inflationary scenario to control in the coming times. And as you said, the fiscal deficit, because now the whole world is impacted by the coronavirus and the economies are supporting their respective citizens like anything. And we have also undertaken a lot of things which were not under control of the government, because pandemic was not under control of any government throughout the world. But the government supported with so many reforms, started from the micro units to the financial markets. That's why the fiscal scenario expanded, and last year's fiscal deficit was 6.9%. And we are thanks to our government that this still remained under the control, because there are economies where the fiscal deficit went beyond 10% also. But thanks to the various policies of the government that they controlled and they anticipated 6.8% and the actual is 6.9%, there is no significant difference in the fiscal scenario. So moving forward, the growth is becoming strong, and we are able to push the trajectory to the 8%, 9%, 10% as anticipated by in the next year, 8 to 8.5%. So the inflation remains somewhere between 4 to 5%. Then our nominal GDP will be somewhere between 13 to 14%. So the ratio of fiscal deficit will also be under control in the coming times, and I am definitely agreeing to the connotation that we will be able to control inflation in the next 3-4 years, and the inflation will be very much in the target of the government.
Dr. Sharma, coming back to the point that the principal economic advisor, Sanjeev Sanyal, was about the recovery of the economy. And he said wherever we were 2020, most of the recovery has happened. In most of the sectors, we are almost back to where we were pre-pandemic. But one sector, which you also mentioned, is the hospitality, the airlines. These sectors, they're still almost 10-11% below the pre-pandemic levels. And I could see that one of the announcements is regarding the hospitality services. The ECGL service is to be extended for this by March 2023 with an increased cover of 50,000. But do you think more can be done for this sector because it is still lagging?
Yes, I definitely agree for your connotation, because all the sectors, starting from the industry, mining, agriculture and allied services, and the manufacturing, electricity, and the construction, all these sectors have recovered from the lows, and they are recovered more than 100%. Like the electricity, gas, water supply, this sector recovered 110%, and the agriculture sector recovered 107%, industry 104%, mining 104%. But the services sector is not able to recover to the level of 100% because of the various issues, because of the stop-start nature of the economy. So I believe that vulnerable sector within the services sector should be supported, and the hospitality sector is one of them, and there must be more reforms or supports from the government side to provide them adequate field to move forward and to recover fully from the daunting impact of the COVID-19. As I mentioned earlier, that from the demand side, consumption segment is also one segment which has not recovered fully from the daunting impact of coronavirus. If we scale them to the level of 100, I believe government consumption in the nominal GDP is contributing 12.2%. This was 12.5% last year in 2021. And the private consumption is 57.5%, but the last year it was 58.6%. So this is the segment which is impacted, and we have to support this segment with more and more reforms and more support, such as direct benefit transfers and the support to the vulnerable sections of the society.
This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
Guinea-Bissau's President Umaro Sissoco Embalo said that many members of the security forces had been killed, repelling an attack on democracy that may have been linked to drug trafficking. Mr. Embalo survived an attempt coup on Tuesday in the West African country. According to reports, the state broadcaster has reported that the shooting has damaged the government building and that invaders are holding officials. President Umaro Sissoco Embalo, a former army general, was believed to be inside the building at the time of the attack. The ECOWAS, a 50-nation West African regional bloc known, termed the violence as an attempted coup and said it is following the situation in Bissau with great concern. The Department of Science and Technology invited applications for financial support to Indian companies with indigenous technologies in semiconductor and sensor sector for commercialization. The department said Indian companies having innovative technologies at commercialization stage in semiconductor and sensor domain now have an opportunity of being supported financially for commercialization and of financial assistance in the form of loans, equity and grants.
The Ministry of External Affairs, in cooperation with the Indian Chamber of Commerce on Wednesday, organized an outreach program on export controls focusing on startups in various sectors of the economy. The outreach was aimed at enhancing awareness about regulations for export of sensitive, dual-use goods and technology. About 200 industries and enterprises, including several startup companies, participated in the webinar. The outreach shared the relevance of export control systems in the context of India's integration with the global economy, international non-proliferation framework and government's flagship initiatives of Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat. Centre has issued simplified procedures to install rooftop solar plant for the residential consumers. Ministry of New and Renewable Energy said a national portal for registering applications from the beneficiary and tracking progress will be developed. The household beneficiary who wish to install rooftop solar under the new mechanism will have to apply on the national portal. The beneficiary will be required to submit necessary information, including details of bank account where the subsidy amount will be transferred. The application will be forwarded online to the concerned DISCOM for issuance of technical feasibility approval within the next 15 working days. It said the beneficiary has to install its plant within a specified period, otherwise his application will be cancelled. The ministry said that the national portal will be developed in about 6 to 8 weeks. Till the national portal comes into operation, the existing procedure for availing subsidy for installation of rooftop solar plant through DISCOMs will continue. The 2nd of February is World Wetlands Day. The day is observed every year to raise global awareness about the vital role of wetlands for people and the planet. The 2nd of February also marks the date of the adoption of the Convention on Wetlands in 1971 in the Iranian city of Ramsar. A call to take action for wetlands is the focus of this year's campaign. India's Environment Minister Bhupendra Yadav announced on the occasion that 2 more of India's wetlands, the Hijadia Wildlife Sanctuary in Gujarat and Bakhira Wildlife Sanctuary in Uttar Pradesh, have been added to the prestigious Ramsar list of wetlands. With this, the total number of wetlands of international importance in India jumped to 49. The Bakhira Wildlife Sanctuary in UP provides a safe wintering and staging ground for a large number of species of the Central Asian flyway. The Khijadia Wildlife Sanctuary is a coastal wetland with rich avifaunal diversity, providing a safe habitat to endangered and vulnerable species. A report from the Business World.
The BSE Sensex rose 696 points or 1.18% to end at 59,558, and the NSE Nifty surged 203 points or 1.16% to finish at 17,780. In the global stock markets, Asian shares rose following overnight gains in the US equity indices. Japan's Nikkei climbed 1.7%, while trade did not take place in the other leading East Asian share markets. European markets were also up in the intraday trade. Oil prices logged modest losses. In the intraday trade, Brent crude was trading around $89 per barrel. Back home, gold prices lost 155 rupees at the multi-commodity exchange for February contracts. The precious metal was trading at 47,810 rupees per 10 grams. On the other hand, silver prices climbed 320 rupees to 61,680 rupees per kilogram for March contracts when reports last came in. And in the forex market, the rupee weakened 4 paise per US dollar. The domestic currency settled at 74 rupees and 84 paise against the dollar. Nishit Kumar for World News, All India Radio.
Moving on to sports, in the second semi-final of the ICC Under-19 World Cup 2022 at Antigua, India set a mammoth target of 290 runs for Australia. India finished at 290 runs for the loss of 5 wickets. Captain Yash Dhul scored a brilliant 110 runs off 110 balls to power the visitors to set the target. Sheikh Rashid scored 94 runs off 108 balls. Chasing the score, Australia were 8 for the loss of 1 wicket in 2 overs when reports last came in. Earlier, India had won the toss and elected to bat. India have been one of the teams to beat at the World Cup, winning all of their games in fine fashion so far. They head into the fixture on the bank of a thumping win over 2020 champions Bangladesh, sustaining their push for another Under-19 trophy win. However, they face a strong Australian side who have just lost 1 game in this tournament. And now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. Let's take a look at what made the headlines in Nepal. Republica writes that the Indian government has allocated its annual grant of 12 billion Nepali rupees to Nepal for the fiscal year 2022-23. The grant pledged by the Indian government for Nepal is the second highest among the South Asian countries. Republica writes that the bridge across the Mahakali River would enhance cross-border connectivity between the Sudur Paschim province of Nepal and Uttarakhand state of India. And now some news from Bangladesh. The Supreme Court of Bangladesh imposed a ban on transporting fentanyl, declaring it as a drug, reports Dhaka Tribune. Financial Express reports that the export earning of Bangladesh increased by over 41% to USD 4.85 billion in the month of January over the same period last year. Let's take a look at the press reports on China. Reuters reported China has failed to meet its commitments under a 2-year Phase 1 trade deal that expired at the end of 2021. Deputy U.S. Trade Representative Sara Binacci said on Tuesday that discussions are continuing with Beijing on the matter. PTI reported that the inclusion of the vague phrase of colluding with capital in the anti-graft campaign launched by President Xi Jinping's ruling Communist Party has sent shockwaves across the country.
A quick look at the headlines once again. India set to reach $400 billion in exports this financial year, asserts Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal. Russian President Vladimir Putin says US and its allies have ignored Russia's top security demands over tensions on Ukraine. Prime Minister Modi discusses bilateral relations with Prime Minister of Bahrain, Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa, over telephone. Special and privileged strategic partnership between Russia and India, a significant contribution to strengthening international stability, says outgoing Russian ambassador to India. US requests an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council over North Korea's missile test. India and the European Union hold second maritime security dialogue in a virtual format. And in cricket, India set a target of 291 runs for Australia in the semi-final of the ICC Under-19 World Cup 2022 in Antigua. And now, before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan Vaishnav Jan by artists from South Africa on their National Day.
वैष्णव जन दो तेने कहिए जय पीड़ पराई जाने रे पर दुखे उपकार करे तो ये पर दुखे उपकार करे तो ये मन अभिमान
With that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.